what's the major point here? It's really all about, from this Agile Manifesto and things from before that, it's really all about balancing lots of important parts and pieces of a useful and a value-added pragmatic method. It's got to be pragmatic, but the punchline is that you need to make. So we have lots of methods, and here I'm going to tell you about what I see as a growing set of issues. Sometimes we call them problems. I'll be nice and kind and say issues. I see it in my organization. I see it throughout the Department of Defense. By the way, my organization is the United States Navy, the Naval Air Systems Command. But here's the problem. It's in the DoD, and it's really out beyond that in the whole worldwide arena. And that is, agile methods are missing discipline features, and discipline methods need to be more agile. So what I want to ask for is your help. Help me by thinking about this, submitting questions, telling stories, because I'm going to share a story, and I want to hear from you about how we can take the successes and the failures that we've seen, and how can we make a better set of pragmatic methods that are most useful. So if you read the outline of my talk this month, I really started from this major point, and it came from a great book of the time, The Conflicts Regarding the How-To Methods. These are the healthy debates, by the way, is what I call them, but this book really did a great job of capturing them. It wasn't always correct. I didn't always agree with it, but it's a great provocative place to think from both sides of the aisle and lots of places in between. But it really, these methods, these debates, sometimes the war on debates, they started way ahead of when I was even a young engineer back in 1984. And so a lot of these methods, matter of fact, I believe all the methods that they talked about in the Balancing Agility and Discipline book were around before the manifesto. A couple of them were even around before the CMMs that came along back in the early 1990s. So this is digging way back in history and time. Here's so far is what I've seen about them. Nearly all of them would work just fine. They'd work okay if projects would just use and do all of the features that they provide. So, having a daily stand-up, but not knowing how to do estimates based upon things like historical data, that just doesn't quite cut it. What does that mean? It means that the debates need to go on, and there's a couple of major reasons for that. We need to keep checking on the methods to make sure they're still working, they're still being used, and number two, we need to always be looking at them for ways of making them better, just like everything else, just about everything that we work with and deal with. Always looking for how to make it better. So what do discipline and agility mean? And notice discipline and agility are not capitalized. They weren't capitalized on my opening slide or almost anywhere else, because they're just plain words that mean these good things. They're actually extremely, agility and discipline, that is, they're extremely compatible in the whole sports world. Great basketball, great football, great whatever sport you partake in. I grew up with my kids, and they were all athletic swimmers. It all took a combination of some great discipline mixed with some wonderful agility to deal with the situation at hand. So really, great engineering requires all of these abilities to come in, to adopt to requirements as well as to handle everything from requirements through development and beyond. So this is also a highest level right out of the book that I'm referencing. Another point out of the book at the highest level is the idea of combining agile and plan-driven methods. This was back in 2004, and they were already talking about, with these great debates, the misconceptions, even back then and at the time, and what the reality was. So really, it's the benefit of blending methods is nothing new, and it's needed today even more than ever. So don't let the misconceptions trump the reality of we've got to look at both sides and take the parts that we need to do the best job. I'd consider taking a look at this book if you're very interested in thinking outside the boxes, because that's what it helps you do. It's not that it's the latest information, but the approach that it takes is a great way. It's got some great stories in it, and in fact, some of the stories that the book uses to tell its story are based upon one project using Scrum and another project using the team software process, and more like that and beyond. So I'd highly recommend it. And if you don't want to read the book, I have a great 85-page PDF brief that I'd be glad to provide you that'll walk you through. It'll show you a lot of the core details behind just these couple of high-level slides I'm going to share with you about the highest level fruits to draw from considering this as a catalyst to look at the methods, and look at the methods on both sides, on the agile side, on the discipline side. So remember that thing called the Agile Manifesto? Sure. What's the real point here? It's about it's the what. It's not about how we do anything. Like I said, most of the methods, in fact, all the methods that were being considered at the time already existed back from the 80s and the 1990s. So every method considered to be agile existed. The most classes and lectures on agile that I've experienced have really lost sight of the distinction, and what it's led to is a lot of confusion and what the book itself calls perplexity, and therefore people kind of stand back and scratch their heads and wonder what the heck. So really, it's the what and not the how. And so many of our great tellers of these stories get the terminology wound around so tightly that they lose sight of what's the manifesto, what's agile, and what's a method like Scrum, which I'll talk to shortly, has become the leading method on what's considered the agile side. But before that, remember something else. That's the capability models, as I shorthanded refer to them. So every capability maturity model, starting back in 1991 with what it had, it had its own way. Just like the manifesto with its 4 major principles and its 12 principles supporting the 4 major tenets of it. Here we had the 5 levels, the 18 plus process areas. And what was this all doing? It was telling you what had to be in a good method or process. Didn't tell you how to do it. Some people sometimes got confused by the CMM. That's where the processes are. No, that's what told us how to build the processes. And those capability pattern models, they were supposed to drive the development of the method, as well as they were used to measure their maturity with techniques that were developed by the Software Engineering Institute, later a lot of outside vendors. But what happened to some of those? A lot of those initial efforts to do this, they failed because they didn't create easy, value-added, pragmatic methods or process sets for that. No good instantiations. And I shouldn't say no good, but a lot of challenging ones. There were certainly a lot of good ones out there too. And then the process generation and then the judging of them by the same, in this case, model versus manifesto, I think in my mind the same kind of ideas, sometimes independent of the actual projects that needed to be developed. They became big projects themselves, and the result was all of those kinds of processes, methods that came from the CMMs, the capability maturity models, became huge, almost independent projects in and of themselves, and probably in some ways created some of the backlash, at least, that was a culmination of at least part of what the Agile Manifesto itself came about from. So just wanted to remind us some of our history and looking at it from both sides now. So what did this lead to? And this is what again, the book referred to as leading to perplexity. You know, just, oh my gosh, pulling my hair out or rubbing my cheeks and screaming. But get my notes here in front of me. All I can say is the truth often is somewhere in the middle. But you'll see these references to stories. The book, the reference book that I used as a catalyst for this, you know, it gave some examples. Things like XP or Scrum were sometimes used as an excuse for not documenting or not doing anything but having a stand-up meeting, as an example before talked about. On the CMM side, for instance, we had a level 4 memorial library of like, I don't know if 99 is the true number, but like a lot of 2-inch binders of processes that didn't do a lot when it came to actually having useful methods for the actual development teams putting out the products. And on you go with the different kinds of things that happened on both sides as a result of that perplexity and confusion. So, so beyond the perplexity and beyond the two sides, we want to remember, you know, I put beware or be aware of the engineering principles and their acronyms, and those two can be confusing and get in the way. But what we saw were that just about every one of these can and should be applied in some ways, probably not all of them in one place at one time. I like to point out a couple of the more humanistic ones. Keep it simple, silly, or stupid as it says, and the perception of this is all the user really needs, but look what the stakeholder comes up with in ideas. Or Yagni was another one in the research I was doing, looking up all the stuff that was around well ahead of both the model and the manifesto, and have come along since then. You aren't going to need it, or as some of them said, you ain't going to need it. Therefore, why are you building it? So some fun comics. They could be in their own Marvel comic world sometimes. But when you look at the top of the list and go down, I mean, some of the earliest methods in the method wars were actually from the 70s and 80s, 40, 50 years ago. The structured analysis and design, object-oriented analysis and design. Then, one near and dear to my heart, the proxy-based estimation tool, the way of, in some methods, taking a view of doing the design of the software, the system, in terms of static and dynamic and internal and external. And on the list goes to so many of these things today that get pretty complex in and of themselves. Point is they all, in some way, probably plug into one or some set of method or methods that you might use and choose and create to do the actual delivery of the product and or service. And last peek back at the book, back in the appendix, there's a great section on comparing all the methods. And this is an actual snapshot right out of that, right from a key page back there in appendix, in the back appendix. And it actually looked at what it claimed were 13 different methods. Now I disagree, because I said, I don't think capability maturity models were any more of a method than were the Agile Manifesto itself, and it didn't appear here, and I didn't think any of those belonged. But look at Scrum right up at the top, and where is Scrum today in the Agile world? It's still pretty much right up at the top, all the way down through Clean Room down at the bottom as being the very highest in rules and regulations, and sometimes what they unfortunately called the plan-based methods versus the product-based Agile methods. And the book has, as you can see with the dots, if you look in it, lots of different ways, at least 3 key ways of how they distinguished and racked and stacked and graded these methods, and there's more today. So that's a snapshot from 2004, almost 20 years ago. And where are we today? So I just picked a few key ones that I'm seeing, at least from my neck of the woods. I'm seeing a lot of Scrum scaled up in a framework called SAFe, TSP, and what we at least in my part of the Department of Defense, call the team process integration. Same kind of ideas, same principles as TSP, but for more than just software development. Same with PSP and PAP, they're personal processes. Those are a team set of individual level, team level, and organizational level. There's DevOps and other variants of that coming along now, which are actually more engineering types for doing development and operational use of these things. There's a new one in the research I was doing called disciplined Agile. So people are going to take Agile and make it more disciplined. This is not what we're here talking about today. But the question is, so I didn't say what's next, I said how next, because remember, these are methods and they're all about how do we do the work. So really, like I said at the very beginning of my my talk, I see a problem and I'm looking for some ideas on how do we solve and approach and keep up the good method talks and disciplines and debates rather, and so forth. So here's my parting shot to my slides. So if every method is a watermelon, take that watermelon-y method and grab any of those sweet, juicy seeds, because we all know that watermelons that still have some seeds in them, those are the more juicy, flavorful, sweet ones. And dig out some of those seeds and take advantage of, as I indicated earlier, you got to BYOM, bring your own method, build your own method. None of them out of the box are perfect. So take the pieces and the principles you choose, put them together into the best pragmatic plan that helps to build the most useful product, and base it on things like the best schedule. Sure, we want to develop it fast, but we want to have the right level of quality based upon who the ultimate customer is. So in my world, a lot of that's going to be the ultimate customer is the guy on the pointy end of the sword. We call them the war fighter, driving the airplane with the weapons on board and risking their lives. They've got to have great software that's developed in an agile way, great software, great systems in an agile way, meaning we've got to stay ahead of our enemy and their ability to sometimes get ahead of us. We got to get back ahead of them if we're not already doing it. So with that, let's go to story time. And I was going to share with you one of the team's stories that, just a second, I'm looking for my, oh, here we go. So one of the teams I've worked with in the Naval Air System Command, the part of the Navy that I work for, and it's a story about a very, so a XXX team developing software systems, being sent out to the fleet to go do that warfighter stuff that I talked about. They started out, they were one of the very first, if not the very first one in our NavAir environment that was striving to use a capability maturity model in the early 1990s to eventually become a level 5, the greatest organization they could be, developing the highest quality products on cost and schedule. And when you slide to the far end of where they are now, almost 25 years later, not quite, they've gone to a scaled agile framework. So some of the points along the path there were, as I said, largest software enterprise in NavAir, software system enterprise. They started their journey in the 1990s. They eventually achieved levels of maturity based upon the CMM and discipline methods and government instructions. But all of that, they were able to pull it together. And by the early 2000s, they were level 3 and then level 5 in that model. They even started to do some projects using team software process. And that got them into the early to mid 2000s. What they found was having a highest maturity disciplined approach did not always put out the perfect, best, highest quality products. They were finding problems. They were finding challenges with sacrificing quality for schedule, not having schedules that they could meet, even though they had gotten pretty good. In some cases, they'd actually put out some duds, some bad things that caused huge turmoil. Where this led them in the early 2010s was a look at maybe we need to be more agile. But instead of looking at how can we combine those agile methods or ideas from those methods with some of the great stuff they were already doing, they essentially tossed it out the window and went to a totally scaled agile framework, the entire huge organization. So what happened on the other side of that by the time they got to the late 2010s, so over in the last 4 or 5 years, is they lost the discipline. They lost the history of using things like numbers to tell them historically how had they performed. Today, they have a hard time doing estimating because not only do they not have access to the data or know how to use the data, the very ideas of how to do a proxy-based estimation and other methods that they were using have run dry on them, and they have now put in place a great safe environment, and they do these 6 sprint-driven quarterly cycles of quickly scampering to get the next 3-month cycle out to somebody they're calling the customer, but the customer, in fact, isn't the right customer. And so they're dealing with some of those kinds of struggles. We certainly don't have the folks out on the front lines fighting the wars. They have their representatives. And so those are just a few of the challenges and problems that they've run into. Now I have another emerging story of a program that right now, they weren't disciplined, they weren't agile, but they were government. And with all of the guidelines that we have in the government, they found they couldn't even plan themselves out of the box they were stuck in. But before I do that, I was wondering, does anybody else have a story or even a comment or something they'd like to add or share at this time? So,
this is Brad. I got a quick one I can share with you guys.
Cool. Thank you, Brad.
So I work with Jeff at Channel Lakes at Naval, and we support Naval across the country. And we got a group reach out to us from back east and said, "Hey, can you help one of my teams working on the West Coast? You're in the same time zone." So we met up with that group, and one of the most important things to them was that they hated the software team that we're working with. They hated the attention they were getting because they were always the one being blamed for any problems with the product they're doing, target aircraft. So they hated the fact that they were being used as the excuse for why things are going badly. They're getting the spotlight for all this bad news, bad attention. So we helped them plan better and track their progress better. And it was amazing that after a number of months that the lead of the team announced to the rest of the software team, we're not the reason why we're late anymore. We've got our act together, we don't overcommit, and we're reporting our progress, and we're managing our efforts. So now some other part of the group, the organization, is the worst problem. And everybody was happy. It was like they reduced a pain point that was really bugging them all. And they all knew they wanted to get better than that. But just having them not be the source of the worst problem by the whole program organization was a huge relief to them to get that attention off their plate. And it was just planning and tracking. Super simple. Anyway, I'll share that with you.
Nice. Nice. Yes, I recall those folks. And they're still around these days, even still trying to do good stuff. Anybody else have any questions, comments, stories, things they'd like to bring up?
This is Steve, Jeff. I'll just make a comment that in my experience working with a lot of different customers, there's, as you mentioned, this sort of differentiation between plan-driven approaches and change-driven approaches. And I guess in my experience, my customers neither fit into either one of those. They may claim that they want to be, they want the software workers to be change driven, and it turns out they want long-term commitments also. When are you going to be done with this thing that may take you 3 months or 6 months or a year or 2 years? Alternatively, some customers claim to be plan driven and they want firm commitments for things. And then during execution, there's nothing but change. And it's a constant turmoil that's driven by the changing needs of the customer stakeholders. So I think your point is well taken that software work often does not at all fit neatly into those categories.
Yeah, and it's why you know, this last minute revelation I had of often we use watermelons to be a bad fruit that's got all the red stuff inside, but in this case, I think when you take some of the different methods and look on both sides of the aisle, not that I want to go to a government example of how our wonderful government folks work together so well, haha, but the idea of I think there's little seeds of great stuff on the agile side, on the discipline side, and in fact, you know, calling those discipline guys the plan-driven ones. The fact is, both sides have to have plans. They have to have a way of estimating. They have to have a way of reporting their progress, short-term and long-term. And that's where I think you really got to put together the method that's best for you, depending on some factors like who the customer is, the trade-offs between high quality and high deliverability, and some of the other illities that are out there, depending on whether we're building new games for the gaming market or a way of delivering a new weapon system to our warfighters so they can be successful in protecting us, and all the other stuff in between. Yeah, other ideas, thoughts, talks. This is good. It's good to get started on a talk today, and I'd love to keep this talk going for a long time. Is one of the key things that something like you know, a software excellence alliance, and for me the C is not only a software, it's a software system excellence alliance of how do we build the best stuff we can of high cost and quality as appropriate to the customer market we're delivering to, is a key part of what we can and should be. So with that,
I'll throw one in, Jeff. And
nice.
It's just you were talking about some of the different just sharing stories, and it made me think of something that I wanted to share, which is I might even call maybe an anti-pattern that I've observed in a number of different like agile best practices presentations I've attended. And the pattern goes something like this. Obviously, if we go back to the 90s, there were a lot of very heavy process-driven models like CMM that, or maybe waterfall design life cycles that turned out not to be. Some of those approaches turned out not to be the best, and the move toward agile has brought remarkable success to the industry. And oftentimes people see that shift away from the discipline toward the agile, and they embrace that so fully that they think that that move is complete dogma. And one of the ways that plays itself out as an anti-pattern that I see sometimes is that, let's say you'll see an agile team and they're struggling with something that's purely understandable and purely reasonable, like the need to give a customer a delivery date, and they're having trouble meeting their commitments. They're having trouble coming up with commitments. They always overshoot. And then when they try to get answers to these questions or try to fix it, sometimes the advice that they get from the larger agile community is, why are you trying to do this? That you're not being agile enough. You just need to tell their customer that your customer, you need to help your customer become agile so that they're not asking you for dates. I mean, this is just one example, but basically the anti-pattern is, in the absence of the discipline that could help them be agile and successful in some of these other things, oftentimes there's a maybe a tendency to fall back and to blame, rather than finding solutions to the problems, shifting the focus and saying, well, you just need to be more agile, and then this problem will go away. And so it's just something, maybe an anti-pattern to be on the lookout for. If someone tells me that my customer's having a problem, and that the root cause is that the customer isn't agile enough, maybe I need to scratch my head and think if there's another solution that can make everybody happy, both me and the customer.
Very good. Yes. Yeah, often what we do at the lowest levels of engineering are not consistent with the highest levels of leadership and management, who are sometimes spending more time managing and less time leading than they ought to be. More on that later, but in another talk. And then the middle guys, the middle leadership management, somewhere in between, that they're trying to combine it and pull it all together. But yeah, people want too much planning, not enough planning, and they're never happy. I see that a lot. Other folks, stories, questions, comments. This to me is the best part of these talks, is if we can all get engaged. And this is great. We're getting some other perspectives and stories. And it's my friend Alan there. Alan's always got some good stories.
Jeff Pulcini, did you have something you wanted to reply back?
No, I was thinking about something, but I'm not sure it's going to add a lot of value. So I'm going to just sit here for a minute.
Oh, okay. Believe me, there are no dumb perspectives or questions or anything else. And as we all speak, we all bring out other points for people that we're thinking along the same lines, and then they speak out. So it's a good thing to talk up. So I was going to ask, is my friend Alan out there, my buddy, my great provider of, I won't fill in the blank. But seriously, yeah, a program, along the lines of this that we've been working on in my organization for about the last, coming up on 4 years of it, is what do you do about the great engineering that's either they're leaving the organization for some reason, whether it's retirement, whether it's changing jobs, and when they leave, they take the great, not the ability to do the classroom stuff, the academic stuff, but the great experiences that they take with them, and how do we build them up to plug them into the great projects and programs that are left behind. And part of it certainly comes from having good, well-founded, solid methods that we have in place for how do we use the data that we've had access to, that we can use to make our better plans and track them more effectively. One of the things we're looking at is that experiential based? Is that knowledge based? Is it extended better kinds of learning? And I think it's a combination of all those and more. But I think that requires also looking sometimes across different methods and different pieces of data to see how you can do that. I know I just recalled, I had in the back here a question I was answering since we have a little bit of time for some of my own customers. As a matter of fact, it was that very same huge customer It's one of our NavAir organizations. NavAir, by the way, the Naval Air System Command, is the part of the Navy that delivers all of the capability of fixed wing and rotary wing ships on boats, like aircraft carriers, and all the weapon systems that come off of them to do their job. Pretty ominous, but yet because of this shift they had gone through of, they were a level 5 organization after years and years of pursuing it, to throw it all away, let's get more agile, we need to be more responsive to our customer, to, oh my gosh, we don't know what our basic process measures are. So I had to go restore this for them. And it was just, hey, it's these 4 things. Now I know some of you who are team and process savvy, team process, personal process savvy, recognize them right away. But they had actually lost connection with, gee, how much time am I spending, as well as how big is the product, and there's a relationship there, to when am I done, plan it, mark it when it's actually done, and oh yeah, let's collect some mistakes so we can figure out how to catch the mistakes sooner. And if we do that in a planned and an actual way, we can still use all of that data and do a wonderful scaled agile framework and do all the quick stand-ups and the quick cycles. But now we'll have a way of better estimating and better, you know, ... on it goes. And oh, by the way, with those, if you have just those 4 measurements, what are all the things you can get insight into? Processes and planning and quality things. Some of us know these really well. For some of them on the, they'd moved to the agile side, they'd forgotten all the other stuff. You know, here's the reminder for them and what that meant. A rate, well, that's a velocity, that's what you guys call it now, but, and so on, you go down through the list. Or in some cases, they don't even have that in the agile world. And yet, especially in the quality world, where they lose so much of the capability of, if you put out quality products and don't build lots of technical debt, you're actually going to have a much better chance of meeting your schedules and your promises to your customers, and they're going to have good stuff that works. So, you know, like I said, don't collect data you're not going to use. Don't calculate metrics that you're not going to use. And then with all of this, if you have that data, now all you need is a wonderful format tool, in other words, for how do I take a peek at all of that? And of course, you know, here's some examples from a tool we all know and love. And I won't mention its name, Mr. David Tuma, but you know exactly what it comes from. And when I showed them this stuff, they were amazed that, oh yeah, that would be great to have, wouldn't it? We're going to get back to you on that. They didn't get back to me. I talked to them again, and they said, yeah, we still want to do that. So they're still figuring it out. It's just amazing. So there, I even had a little time to share some backup slides of what kinds of answers to, you know, in this Jeopardy round of, we give them an answer and then ask them what the question is, and they don't know. Ha ha. Anyway, that's me. I've worked for NavAir for a long time. I've done all these things, and like I said, my customer's the warfighter in most cases. We all have important customers for different reasons, so make sure the methods fit the customer as well as the development and everything that goes into that.